Hey everybody, it is me, Andres Salazar, and I'm taking some time out of doing some painting to talk to you, lovely people, about this really cool book. But before I do that, we've got to do a little housekeeping. One, we have memberships now. So now you can be a member of the Art of Comics channel. What does that do? Why do I want to spend $3? Give him $3 for this. Well, a couple things. One, we're going to do some member-only videos. We're going to do some deep dives on your personal comics or things you want me to talk about. We'll do that. We'll also do some more art stuff, art-specific things if you wish. We can do that. You get contact with me, one-on-one stuff. I highlight you. I interact with you a bit more and stuff like that. So it's a way to support the channel, support what I'm trying to do here, the content that I'm giving you. So I encourage you to think about that. The other thing is AndresSalazarArt.com. New website. Comics, sketches, illustration, paintings. It's all there. My blog is there. My photography is there, which I don't talk about my photography as much. We should. So go check out AndresSalazarArt.com. Boom. Now, on with the show. We're going to do a series. Actually, I'm just going to do these videos, and we're just going to bang these out. One by one, year by year. There's a company called Tomorrow's Publishing, and I love these guys. These are erudite, academic, super nerd, into the history and minutia of comic books. These guys know what they're freaking talking about. And if you recall, at San Diego Comic-Con, I did interview and speak with one of the publishers and I think an editor there for a little bit of time. So check out the San Diego Comic-Con video. I love their work, dude. This is the kind of stuff from a historical perspective, from a record keeping, is really important and really cool. If you like comics, totally suggest going down these guys, the rabbit hole. I bought one of their books. They're 45, I think they're $50, a little pricey. At the show, I think it was 45. I bought one of them because I wanted to be conservative. But now I wish I would have bought more because they're pretty freaking badass. But I bought the one that I thought was the most important for me, which is the 80s. So this covers comic book history, what's going on in comics from 1980 to 1989. If I were to get another one, it'd probably be the 90s and then maybe the 70s. And that's probably much it. I don't really... The other eras, I'm not really into, blah, blah, blah. And the 90s... I was only into comics till like 93, and then I kind of like was gone from comics until like 99 when Kingdom Come came out. Kingdom Come by Alex Ross and Mark Waid was what brought me back into comics. So that, and then Sin City as well. So if we say the two things, it was like Kingdom Come, Sin City. I remember going to the store and seeing it was like, I remember the emotion. I was like, whoa, this is comics. This is what's going on in comics. And this is really freaking cool. And I was like all in on Sin City. I asked her for Christmas. I got a bunch of the volumes for Christmas. I was like all about Sin City. Okay. Now let's just go ahead and take a look. So we're going to do this video and then we're going to do another one. And we'll just do one for a year. Let's do it right now. Come on. Let's do it. We got nothing better to do.
Are you ready?
Okay, let's do this. Episode 1, Part 1, 1980. So we'll start off with mentioning that Keith Dallas is credited as the writer of this. I'm sure it took a host of people. The production's really nice. It would be nice to have a slipcase, or a dust jacket, but I don't need it. I'm fine. It's a little pricey, but because of the print run, I'm assuming that's part of the reason why it's 50 bones. So let's take a look. Nice. I really like the end pages, first comics. I mean, there's some fun stuff. It looks like a commercial, one of the ads in the comic. 1984, John Sable, Warp, Grimjack American Flag from Mr. Howard Chaykin. Grindel, Scrog. I don't know Scrog. I don't know some of these guys. I don't know Primer. So very fun. This is where we're going to get into the direct market. All these kind of things are happening in this time. So it's pretty cool. Zot by shoot the name. Never mind. I know his name. Let's not talk about it. Understanding Comics, Scott. Okay. Jason Sachs. I know Jason Sachs. I did not know he worked on this. Okay, I'm gonna have to email Jason Sachs. Very cool. Okay, let's talk comics. Let's do this. Okay, so chapter 1, 1980. The times were a-changin'. You know, if you think about the 80s, and this is just talking about, moving from newsstands to the direct market, the major things that happened in the 80s. We're talking Frank Miller, Dark Knight, Spiegelman's Mouse, Moore and Gibbons' Watchmen, Amazing Spider-Man with McFarlane, Secret Wars, Crisis on Infinite Earth. There's so many things that were happening. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Like the 80s to me, I've mentioned this many times. The 80s to me, especially the late 80s, was just full of some of the most creative, innovative stuff. It just was. It was just really freaking good. And yeah, that's where it is. Love and Rockets. We're going to get to that. Of course, Chaykin is mentioned a couple times, and he's got his little stippled pointillism kind of texture here, which he kind of abandoned later on for other things, but it's kind of fun here. It looks a little archaic now, but it's fine. Anyway, so yeah, let's just get in on what's going on. Here's some more just notes before we get into it, talking about how they got the ideas, where they got the data from, things like that, how the dates are, if something's published versus the date that's on the comic, stuff like that. Just little details, not too important. There's Zot, and then I've never read Nexus. Some of those books I never got a chance to get into. I would like to check them out because I'm more interested in these kind of smaller publishers than the mainstream DC and Marvel, just because I've read all those, back in the day. Okay. Dark Phoenix and the darkness before the direct market. So we're talking about... Can we start with just mentioning the climate, economic climate, the world climate, right as the decade begins? You have the Iran-Contra affair with the hostages. There's issues with the Cold War's beginning. You have economic downturn and a lot of just kind of stress. And part of that stress is also being faced in the comic book industry. There's a mention here about the number of books that were being sold. Huge inflation. Check this out. What do we have here? In 1980, the average number of comic books sold per month was 5.4 million for Marvel and 2.8 million for DC. Now, you might today think, holy crap, that's a lot of comics. 5.4 million for Marvel. Well, 3 years ago, in 77, Marvel was selling 7 million and DC 4.2. So not half, but a good a third or so is gone. So their sales have just plummeted. And so everyone's just thinking, okay, this is the end of comics, which happens all the time. Even today, they talk about this is the end of comics because of digital, or this is the end of comics because of this or that, right? And this is what Jim Shooter is like, no, dude. Jim Shooter, who was the editor-in-chief at the time, he said this for Gary Groth. Remember Gary Groth, who does Fantagraphics? He had, his magazine, The Comics Journal. This is a quote. I keep seeing letters from people. I keep hearing people at conventions and so forth talking about the imminent demise of the comic book industry. I don't know what I have to do to correct this erroneous information. We're not going out of business. We're making good money. We're not setting the world on fire, but at this point, in this country, very few people are. We're doing well. Marvel is a healthy company. It's not a bad year or even a mediocre year. It was a good year. So this is, September of 80, telling the people this is a good year. So even though he was like assuring people that the industry's good, there are still a lot of publishers that are like struggling. They mentioned Archie, Harvey Comics, Charlton, Gold Key Comics, Warren Publishing, which of course does Creepy, Eerie, Vampirella. They wind up going out of business by the end of the 80s. Whitman Comics, I don't even know Whitman Comics. Fawcett. So a lot of these smaller companies are just having problems. Dick Gordiano said this in 1981. He said, comic books are considered fodder. If the newsstand distributor has that much room in the back of the truck, they'll put that many comics. And they don't bother to check them by title. They just grab a handful of comics, Charlie, and throw it in the truck. Is that a way to sell a comic book? Right? So it's just clear that like the newsstand does not really care, right? They only receive, a newsstand was only getting 40 cents or 50 cents for a comic book that was sold. Whereas if it was like Time magazine or Sports Illustrated, they got a lot more. So you just get more money for that space. So they didn't really give a crud about comics. And it's that kind of like comes up with this idea of, well, maybe we need to direct market, which is comic book shops, right? Specialized comic shops. We call them local comic book shops. That is where the energy starts getting moved towards here in the 80s. I really like this little timeline. They do this for each year. We talk about Star Trek. That first movie was freaking cool. Epic Magazine. Epic Illustrated is basically Marvel's kind of look at heavy metal, using some European and more mature audiences. So that's it's a great magazine, actually. What else are we talking about? Roy Thomas. He's talking about leaving Marvel, going to DC. The arcade game Pac-Man debuts in Japan. May the 22nd. That's cool. Star Wars Empire Strikes Back. I didn't know that was 80. Wow, that was 80. Teen Titans by Marv Wolfman and George Perez. That's like just a crazy book. Doug Moenick and Bill Sienkiewicz start doing Moon Knight, which, that starts off Bill Sienkiewicz's huge career. Talk about Howard the Duck. Frank Miller's doing Daredevil. He's now becoming the hot artist, the big character. He's bringing in Elektra, things like that, really changing the game of comic book storytelling and really making this street level comic book hero into something really cool. Really, really cool. We've got, this is kind of interesting. Reagan winds up winning and Reagan becomes president. Who Shot JR? That was an episode of Dallas. That was cool. So they're just kind of fun little like elements. I didn't know that Roger Stern and John Byrne worked together on Captain America. That's interesting. Wow, Dazzler #1, the first comic book to be exclusive to the direct market, and pre-order sales were 500,000. It's pretty good, dude. One comic, 500,000. Art Spiegelman's Raw comes out, and it features the first part of Mouse. So think about that. You got Mouse, Frank Miller Daredevil, Sienkiewicz's Moon Knight, Dazzler, the direct market. All these things are happening in 1980. Pretty freaking cool, man. Pretty cool. Jim Shooter becomes, I mentioned, the editor-in-chief. He's only 28 when he's the editor-in-chief. He started doing comics as a 13-year-old. Now, a lot of people have very strong feelings about Shooter. It's kind of divisive kind of character. But let me say this. From what I've gathered, I do not know the man at all, but he seems to know and love comics. And for that, he gets he gets kudos. I would love to read this issue to really get a scope of him. But let's just read a little quote. He says, "When I became editor at Marvel, it was like running a kindergarten. It was like this one's caterwauling and that one's throwing a tantrum. And they hated it if you told them the simplest things. Like, look, we really need to introduce the characters. Nobody tells me anything," stuff like that. It had become normal for a creator to become a prima donna. So it talks about listen to this. In 1980, Marvel produced books that were edited by Joe Duffy, Archie Goodwin, Louise Jones, Al Milgrom, Denny O'Neil, Jim Scallop. Written by Chris Claremont, John DeFalco, DeMatteis, Steve Grant, Mark Grunwald, Roger McKenzie, David Michelin, Ralph Macchio, Bill Mantlo, Doug Monac, Roger Stern, Roy Thomas, drawn by Sal Buscema, John Byrne, Michael Golden, Bob Layden, Bob McLeod, Frank Miller, Jim Mooney, George Perez, Don Perlin, John Romita Jr., Bill Sienkiewicz, Walter Simonson. These editors and these writers, you have editors who are artists, who are writers. You have editors who are like in the business. Now, here's my little soapbox quickly. Editors are kids right out of college who want to go into marketing, or maybe they're writers and they got a degree in writing and they want to write screenplays or whatever. They're editing comics. They weren't professionals in the industry. They weren't artists. Some of them might have been writers in comics, but really probably not. Editors are just glorified project managers in comics, and they're not professional comic creators. And that is, I think, an issue with the way comics are being made and the type of comics being produced, quality-wise. Because these guys, and it's okay to be young. I'm not saying you can't be young. I mean, he's the editor-in-chief. He's 28. I don't have a problem with the age. But the experience level of being in the industry making these things and knowing how it's done. And so, yeah, there you go. Okay, enough of that. Enough of that little bit. We go into talking about, John Byrne stepping down because of, there was some issues with Stern and Byrne team with Captain America. And so they walk away from Captain America, which became an issue. Then I mentioned Frank Miller becoming just a, he did all these fill-in work, but once he starts getting Daredevil and really banging out, it just becomes a powerhouse. And they just became just great storytelling, just great stuff. And this was an issue where there was some drugs involved, and so that became kind of an issue with the comics code and all that kind of jazz. And this is Frank Miller. What the code was trying to do was kill a story that has a very strong anti-drug point to it. It's not like we were advocating it, right? This story about PCP, and the story was called Child's Play. It's this issue, Daredevil 167, called Child's Play, and it's basically about this drug dealer who uses PCP, also known as angel dust, and because that's on the camera or on the page, the Comics Code Authority were like, we can't have that, and he's like, we're not glorifying it, but it is what it is. At the same time that's happening with Marvel, we also have X-Men. So this is John Byrne, Chris Claremont, banging out some of the best stuff that was made. the Dark Phoenix saga, just the popularity of this work was out of control. It was such a good story. And that was another, I mean, this is wonderful artwork that he did. What else should we talk about? Here we go. John Byrne. Let's do a little bit of John Byrne quote. John Byrne wanted no more part of it. Later the year, he stepped down as X-Men artist, officially claiming he was burned out of the series. What John Byrne was truly burned out of was collaborating with Chris Claremont. He confessed many years later. I always describe my relationship with Claremont as being kind of Gilbert and Sullivan, and we ended up splitting up because we argued over the color of the carpet in the theater. The ultimate breakdown really was that we could never entirely agree on who those characters were, just personality-wise. And one day it suddenly dawned on me that as much as I thought Cyclops was this guy, and Storm was this gal, and Wolverine was this guy, Chris was writing in his way, which I didn't agree with. And that was what was seeing print, was the way that Chris was writing it, because he had the last hand, right? The writer actually puts the words on after their art, right? So because he had the last, so if I didn't like Chris's interpretation of those characters, then I didn't like the characters, because that was who they were. That was who the fans were liking. And when I hit that wall, I sort of went, wow, I can't do this anymore. I don't like these characters anymore. So boom, dude. There you go. And that's when Dave Cockrum came back and actually worked a little bit. Now it talks about Bill Sienkiewicz was going to be on Fantastic Four. I didn't know. Yeah, he went to Moon Knight, but I didn't know Sienkiewicz did Fantastic Four at all. So I need to go look those up, because that would be interesting to check out. At the same time, X-Men's blowing up, we have DC. And let me tell you, if you've not read the Marv Wolfman, George Perez series, their little like stint, it's so good, especially the Terra story in Judas Contract. It's called Judas Contract. You've got to read it. It is so good. Just so good. Yeah, this was the book to beat, and they did some amazing stuff. And Perez just, he knew what he was doing, man. Crazy. Amazing artist. Okay. Oh, and then we're talking about like the caption boxes, how that kind of changed. They started using narration instead of the thought balloons. So they kind of like moved it. Okay, this will be next episode. Anyway, there you go. Kind of a quick episode, maybe not so quick, but that's 1980. Next episode, 1981. Thanks for watching, guys.